presenter is Anne Shaftel. She is a conservator with the Treasure Caretaker Training.
Thank you. I'd say that the people that look at my posts aren't all conservators. I have up to the limit of Facebook followers who are usually people very far away who don't work in museums or conservation labs. They live in remote areas. And my social media allows me to communicate with them, mostly through Messenger and WhatsApp, etc. And we communicate through social media solely, since they don't do email anymore. And we only use the phone on WhatsApp, etc. I've been doing this since 1970, long distance communication and work. In 1970, I first looked into conservation in India, and at that time, the National Museum laboratory looked like this. There were men in suits doing chemistry. When I began as a conservator, which was working as an apprentice in 1971, 1972, there was no email, we had no internet. It was all slides or Kodachrome and paper, and I had a typewriter. One thing I agree with is I don't put anything personal on any of my social media. Even the people I love the most, I wish to protect. And for example, this is a picture of my grandson, which you'd never see on any of my social media postings. I work in private practice, and I have a Canadian registered company called Sondru. And I work as Anne Shaftel Conservator under the legal economic package of my Canadian company, Sondru. And I work on many diverse things. As a conservator, Anne working with her company, Sondru. I travel around the world as that. For example, I taught at Yale recently as under Sondru and Shaftel, conservator, and in Australia as well. Well, with my nonprofit, I have a USA registered nonprofit, and it's Treasure Caretaker Training. And so my nonprofit is hired for different reasons, and it's funded by private funders. It's really important when you're posting to let people know who actually is doing the work. For those of you that have had nonprofits, you'll know that they're very complicated to run. This is our team. And for my nonprofit, I and maybe a team member or two do our websites and social media, which is comprehensive. We have several different Facebook and several different Twitters and several different Instagrams. They're all related to our nonprofit. We also have an extensive website, which has didactic material for a monk and nun audience. It's all about basically risk assessment and preservation of monastery treasures from their point of view. Our website has direct links to our Zooms on the same topics. And we do a lot of social media messaging because basically 24 hours a day, we are available to monks and nuns and their communities to answer in a very confidential way their questions about preservation of their own cultural heritage treasures. Yes, when I say it's unrelenting, if you look for the arrows pointing, it's because that's 2:38 a.m. And this is also very early in the morning, 3:05 a.m. I do try to turn off my devices so they don't ding. You can see the second one was in Mandarin. And we deal in our many languages. We have active translators in Nepali, Tibetan, Hindi, Mandarin, Cantonese, etc. All our risk assessment materials is translated, and we update the translations. We pay our translators. It's not just English and French like we have in Canada. It's quite complicated because I did try AI, artificial intelligence translation, and it was a disaster, actually, for technical terms and our conservation approach. I'm running through these are actual posts that show what I'm talking about. We also advertise and share. It's very important to share what we're doing because on social media, on our on-site work, because that's how we get invitations to other monasteries in other countries. They see what we're doing, for example, in Kathmandu. This is just very recently visiting monasteries, and then we get invited to back to Sikkim for the fourth time to do the same. We meet with colleagues all over the world, and I share their picture and I definitely link to their pages. This is really important. I linked to the social media pages of the monasteries and nunneries because, yes, they do have them. And they're quite active. And the monks and nuns I work with, almost all of them have their own pages. They're on Instagram and they communicate with me on social media. Again, we don't do email is basically how it's translated. We don't do email. This, for example, is a return I did years later after the Nepal earthquake. There's some before and after images. When I first arrived, was sent there right after the earthquake in Nepal and how they have rebuilt to be more earthquake proof. I do some art photography too, which people seem to love. With our social media, we combine. In other words, we draw attention to Zooms we've done, which get translated. This is really important. International Zooms, and all of these people are linked. In other words, our social media links to our Zooms and to our publications. Buddhist Door, for example, has a running column of my Zooms all about Buddhist monastery treasures preservation. This Buddhist Door has on their website a revolving link to my Zooms on these topics. Also, it helps to advertise your lectures with your 4,000 monk and nun followers because they want to watch it after. Like, for example, so many wanted to see what the experts, not me, but the other experts speaking before and after me, how they explain their social media. These are some posters. This is a social media post by the person who was the translator talking about the event at which he translated. And of course, one of his own posts is in his language, in Nepali. We're careful about our visuals. We do videos, which are quite popular. This one on this particular teacher's came to about like 20,000 views on his, but not on mine. And this one, I wanted to share what it's actually like to fly up to the Tibetan border in a helicopter when there are no roads. In any case, I wanted to mention that was 3,500 meters up high. I'd like to say that Scott Haskins, who's a conservator in the US, I think has the best social media outreach. He works privately and has a company. And whenever I have a question, I ask him. He's very professional about it. Again, you can use your social media to share your research and publications as long as you're willing to have them translated yourself. This is talking about some research. This paper I wrote about digital in painting, which actually got a lot of play in many monasteries, and also conservators found it quite interesting. That's all done digitally rather than over clean and over paint tankas. We did this whole thing when COVID first came out. In other words, people spraying too close to their sacred art with sanitizers, etc. And this was translated and well received. When I repost, it's for a reason. I know my time's almost up, but I wanted to say I do repost, but it's for a reason. For example, here's a post about a tanka preservation workshop I did a few years ago in New York. And here's a post about my Zoom of tanka conservation with the Queen's University program, which I just loved. They were so brilliant. And the reason I reposted these is because in Australia recently, I did a lot of conservation of Buddhist treasures, teaching there. And this site has invited me back. So I reposted their own social media posts about my work there in advance, me returning there. And I even say that I'm looking forward to returning there to do an actual workshop on preservation. So you can use reposts for that. Fundraising, as conservators in private practice, we're not all about making money. I care mostly about the communities and how they themselves take care of their own cultural heritage treasures. And I care about being a really good mentor. This is really important. We have to have funding in order to do this. Some people do it for me on their birthdays. It's pretty easy to do. And transparency, especially on social media, is really important. But you have to ask your funder if they want to be acknowledged or not. This is so important. So we're announcing some projects currently. I'm returning to the remote Tibet border where we have to take the helicopter up to 3,300 meters, which is really high. And this is what we'll be doing. Who we'll be doing it with. The community we're doing it in. some examples of what we'll be doing. These will be made into more social media posts, but I definitely wanted to just share with you as conservators watching, if any of you are interested in joining us on this project, just let me know. The helicopter has room for a few, and we'll be doing this project for 5 years. It's fascinating. This is what all the things we're going to get funding for. The title of my presentation was Conservation on Call, Creative, International, and Unrelenting. And I do look forward to your questions. Again, from the point of view, I work as a conservator in private practice and as working through a nonprofit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne. That was
Thank you.
fantastic. And I think it really highlighted one of my favorite things about social media, which is being able to listen in and learn from conversations that you're maybe not the target audience for. So seeing the way that you use it to communicate with a community that's so much further afield from our Canadian one, and being able to get just a tiny bit of insight on how you and that community those communities work together. I also just want to take this moment to thank Anne for her patience. We had an issue with posting her wrong social media addresses on our Facebook and Instagram posts. So if you tried to follow Anne and her work from our social media and had trouble, please go back to the email invitation and take a chance to look at those real links, because the work is fantastic. So thank you, Anne.